we are back to the HR perspective in attracting the right talents to help you build a more diverse environment. Here to talk about it, please welcome Nikki Remkes, Manager HR Specialist and HR Business Partners, Sodexo. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Can I start with the obvious question? Why should companies, or what should companies that are keen to reach for more diverse candidates start with? In fact, what's the starting point?
Yes, that's a good question. I always liked this quote by I think Helen Turnbull. It says the unchallenged brain is not worth trusting, right? So, what is it that you do that excludes others, and what's your blind spot in this? So that's something from a practical standpoint, right? So is the hiring manager ready? And if they're not, can you help them by ensuring that they understand your policy that you have? Do they believe in it? Do they embody it? Do they support what they are doing? And you also need to make sure that you have the discussion of bias and privilege within your company, and you can use easy tools like the Harvard implicity bias test that everybody can access freely online. And let your managers do this. See if they have their blind spots and let them identify their own blind spots. And in that sense, within Sodexo, for us, the policy is quite straightforward. So there's zero tolerance, so to say, of harassment or discrimination and within the workplace. And we encourage our people to speak up, but that's not enough, I think. So what we're doing more is also to train them, like make them aware on diversity, equity, inclusion. What does it mean? Let's have those discussions. How can we have those discussions in a proper way? Like we were very interesting in the talk just before here. Okay, how do we talk to each other? How do we make things and discuss that internally? And I think in the end, it's also depending on the situation that your current business state is in. So in the end, you need to keep in mind we still are we want to do the best. People in a business or in an operation, they still want to grow. They want to get better, and your business in that sense is reflective, or at least should be, of the society that you're operating in. And if it's just a business that has one location in a particular city, or if it's a global business, then you have more research maybe to be done. But in the end, also according to latest research, if you're not diversifying in your hiring and not diversifying in attracting diverse candidates, your candidate pools will shrink. I think the latest number is up to 29% even. In that sense, you will start missing out. And then as a business, you also start hurting financially. So there's always a case to be made, not just a moral one, but sometimes also a financial one, if that encourages your board to be more inclusive in that regard. Yes.
The financial angle, I believe, often proves difficult to understand for many, let alone approve. So let's try and make it a little bit more actionable at this stage, in the sense that if you really want to have diverse candidates, regardless of what your logic behind it is, where do you start? What are the first actions? Imagine you're the person actually in charge of setting up an organization or pushing it towards a more diverse way of thinking.
So I think the first action that you need to do in that sense, so you have your diversity policies, your diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, right? How does that translate to the market proposition? And why does somebody want to work for your company? These are the questions that you need to ask yourself first. And then it will be getting slightly more complicated, because there you have your D&I policy, you have your company policy, and you have your employer brand. And that needs to fit together and needs to complement each other and make it stronger. And that's the first thing that you need to start off with. That's your starting point. Then your recruitment teams, your sourcing teams can do more practical aspects. So look at your workforce. Does that embody diversity? In which part doesn't do that. And then you can ask them to source in a more specific way. An easy example or practical example is that what we see nowadays, the he, him, the she, her, that you can source specific for a certain type of sex for a candidate, and so it's type of gender. So that's something that's something practical that you can start off with. But subsequently, you need to ask yourself, right, where is your target audience found? And are you visible on their media? Are you visible on other platforms or organizations that are related to the D&I policy and the population that you want to target, and where are they found? And for every market, that might be different. So you need to analyze your market in that sense. Okay, where can we find them? How can we engage them? And that's the same thing. Do you speak their language? And you need to analyze that as well. It's for if there are any recruiters now currently in the audience, it's the same thing. You have a very niche type of role. Do you speak the language of that IT guy, or do you expect of that engineer? And if you're not doing that, then you will not reach them. So there are very great initiatives in DIY platforms. I think we are one of them today. But you need to think, okay, what's the truth? Like, what does the company look like? Does it reflect society? And does that, if it doesn't, why? So within the Sodexo group, there are very great initiatives to build on, right? But fortunately, they also leave us some freedom in order to look at our own markets, like what's our diversity, equity, and inclusion question there, and how do we can use the different incentives. So what we're using now as well is very practical. Is using, for example, video applications. So somebody, like we are having a discussion now, they can apply with a video and really showing like, okay, who they are, what kind of person are you. And for a lot of roles, how you behave matters, right? And how you behave is also the first part in how we believe you are going to fit into our company and in our company culture. And as a hiring manager, they're not seeing CVs anymore in that sense. They're seeing a person, a real life human being, and that's something that's more easy to resonate to than a piece of paper. Another trick that you could use in that sense, if you think your hiring manager is not ready for that, you can also anonymize CVs, anonymize motivation letters as well, so that they can simply look, okay, is this the profile or a candidate that I would like to attract? Another thing that I've been using is our referral, an application that we have implemented within the business, so people can see their own networks much better and attract people from their own network. But that only works properly if you already have that diversity in your workforce and want to build on from that. If you're starting from scratch, then you are looking more from that sourcing perspective, I would say. Yeah. However,
Nikki, tell
I
me,
think, yeah.
is it a paradox of? Yeah,
yeah.
please.
No, it's just one final point. I think it's what I see often is that we find our golden grail or our holy grail, so to say, when it comes to, okay, now I found our diversity population. But you need to keep in mind those are people. People change, behaviors change, so they might be found on this platform today. And I think we had a talk on TikTok today as well, and that might be the platform that they're at tomorrow, right? So you need to be able to move and continuously analyze what you're doing in order to make sure that you keep getting your attraction right. Sorry. Yeah.
I think I can already include the very first question coming from our audience. Emily is asking, does the Harvard implicit test really test implicit bias, though? Or does it test speed of touching I and E buttons on your keypad?
True. It depends on how you want to use it. I name it specifically because it's free, so everybody can use it. And it's useful in that sense to get the discussion going. In the end, it's still a discussion that you need to have, right? So human to human, being to being, and that's something that helps people, making them aware of. It's the same thing as the privilege videos that you see structurally. Usually, I think in the American setting, and then a group of people is asking questions, is asked questions, and they can take a step forward in case this applies, the answer applies to them. And that's also these kind of tools. No, they're not. Again, they're not a holy grail, but it helps you to start that conversation and make them aware of there is actually a bias there that holds you back in supporting the policy that you say that you embrace.
With only 4 minutes left for our conversation, let me ask you this. Do you think it's a paradox, Nikki, that
Mm.
to even start thinking about diversity and identity, you first need to really, really understand your own organizational identity much, much better, regardless of how far you are in the process? Because you can't do it
Mm.
well unless you really understand the organization so that you do not end up forcing things that look artificial, strange, irrelevant, maybe, to just about everyone.
Correct. And you need to have that conversations internally as well. So it's if you are not having those conversations internally and making people be aware of, and also include them in the communication that you want to have externally, um, it's it's something that you otherwise going to keep remain running in circles in that regard. So it's a continuously moving conversation, and as an organization, you need to fully support that, not just with your policy, but also making people, giving the opportunity for people to speak up, supporting it with training, but also reflect it really in your hiring and look at your hiring data and look at, hey, how does my leadership look like? How does my different teams look like? Do I have that diverse workforce that I'm looking for? And if not, go and check your policy and check your data where it goes wrong. So to say, does it go wrong that we're not attracting these people, or is it wrong that we're not hiring them? And that will help you to pinpoint where to focus your conversation.
So, what you're saying indirectly is that the most foolish way to approach it from the top down perspective is one person thinking, okay, this would look nice if we had these ethnicities represented, this kind of these categories of disabilities, etc., etc. So this is exactly the way you shouldn't do it. So no parities as such imposed on the organization will work. Or
No, if you start, of course you need some support, I guess, in the top down structure. However, you need to speak with the people that working daily with each other and see what their vision is. And our societies are getting more diverse anyway, and those is something that people find difficult on sometimes. And that's not just at home, but that's also on the in the workspace. And then you need to have that conversation on all levels. If you're not having that conversation on all levels, you will not get that buy-in that you need, or that understanding that you need. If you don't get that understanding, then how are they going to execute what you have thought of?
exactly. And my last question would be, how do you communicate openness to diverse candidates in a more inclusive way?
Um, there's different ways, of course, to going about that. But I think you need to be first very clear on your position and your vision that you have. Within Sodexo, we directly support like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we have 5 big pillars that we're focusing on in that. And that's like, you have to keep in mind on the other hand, and in today's environment, it's sometimes easy to do something wrong, right? Everything needs to happen fast. People need to move forward. Um, but if you have a strong general position where you can fall back on in case that's needed, that's something that is helpful. In my opinion, I think the biggest risk is not really looking at the language that is used by the audience. And if you misuse like certain words, they have a much bigger effect than you can possibly think of because of your own blind spot in that regard. So what we tend
Exactly.
to do is then really use colleagues of those intended groups and to proofread, or what I would suggest if you don't have them already in your labor force or as a colleague, talk to different D&I platforms, and I found they're really happy, more than happy to help you and assist you in your messaging.
Nikki, and one last question, even though we've run out of time, but perhaps a quick list of bullet points to that one. Pablo, which criteria would you suggest to promote creating a diverse talent pool that is focused first on gender equality, ethnicity, LGBTQI, age, etc.? What are your thoughts about quotas?
Quotas. Ooh, that's a difficult one. That depends on the size of your company, the thing that you're going for, then also what your society in that sense in which you operate look like. From my personal perspective, what I would first always recommend is look, hey, if I walk in the street around my office building, so to say, what I see in the street, is that the same as I see reflected in the office or not? And if that's not the case, why? Because if you start working on certain quotes, then it needs to be built on something. And if these quotes tend to shift as well, because your society is changing, your environment is changing. So you need to be aware of that and always be open and to keep on reflecting on what am I doing. This is a process that never stops. So if you embody it, you need to go forward for the full 100% and keep on going with that. And if it focuses on your talent pool, yes, talk to your HR representative and look at your organization. Okay, where do we see discrepancies? Where do we see is
And
there that diversity that I'm looking for or not? And focus on that specific bit that you're missing.
And this is all we have time for. Nikki, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much. Nikki Remkes, Manager HR Specialist and HR Business Partners at Sodexo, talking about actionable tips for attracting and building a diverse candidate pool. Thank you once again.
Right. Thank you again for your time and invitation. And I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to connect online on LinkedIn if you did. And if not, let's keep it our little secret. Have a great
Thank you once more.
conference, everybody.